She only meant to apologize for denting his car. She never expected to collide with the one man who unknowingly held the key to her past. When a billionaire CEO sees a drawing of a boy he thought was lost forever, one question shatters everything. Why does she have his... Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The rain came down in silvery sheets, soaking the morning rush outside the cafe. Elara gritted her teeth as she pedaled through the puddles, her canvas bag bouncing against her hip. Her bicycle, 3 gears short of functional, wobbled as she turned the corner toward Brew and Bloom, the cafe where she worked 6 days a week. Her sketchbook was wrapped in a plastic bag inside her messenger tote, but her clothes weren't nearly as lucky. She was almost at the back entrance when her brakes gave a harsh squeal. Too late. She slammed into something solid. Her handlebars jerked sideways, and her body lurched forward. She skidded across wet pavement, narrowly missing the door of a sleek, obsidian car now streaked with a long line of silver from her handlebars. The crash echoed across the alley. "Are you blind?" a voice snapped behind her, cold, sharp. Elara blinked rain from her eyes as she scrambled up. Her knees burned, scraped raw, and the front tire of her bike had bent into a warped oval. But it was the man stepping out of the car that made her heart stutter. Tailored suit, clean-shaven jaw, eyes like winter steel. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, brushing her damp hair from her face. "I didn't see you coming around the corner. My brakes..." He didn't speak, just stared at her. The alley seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, she thought he might scream, or worse, call the police, sue her, demand she pay for the damage she couldn't afford in 100 lifetimes. Instead, he did something strange. He looked at her like she wasn't even the problem, like she was familiar. Then, without a word, he stepped around the bent bicycle and walked past her, right into the front entrance of the cafe. Elara stood still, soaked to the bone and trembling. What just happened? She wheeled her broken bike to the back, clocked in late, and tried to pretend her day hadn't started with a disaster. Her manager muttered something under his breath as she passed, but she barely heard it. Her thoughts were still back in the alley, with that man and the way his eyes had looked at her, like he recognized something. An hour later, the bell above the cafe door jingled. She was restocking the pastry case when Bryn, her coworker, nudged her. "Don't panic," Bryn whispered, "but that guy who looks like he stepped out of a GQ cover, he's back, and he's looking at you." Elara turned slowly. There he was, tall, soaked coat removed, standing in front of the register like he'd been there 100 times. Only he hadn't. No one like him ever came here. He stepped forward. "Black coffee," he said. She blinked. "Room for cream?" His gaze didn't flicker. "No." She poured the coffee, hands slightly shaky, and handed it to him. He paid in cash, nodded once, and walked to the corner booth. He stayed for exactly 20 minutes. Didn't open a laptop, didn't touch his phone, just stared out the window, sipping coffee like it held answers. Then he left. No one knew his name. Not yet. And Elara, still unaware that she'd just collided with Damon Wolfe, the most private billionaire CEO in the city, finished her shift without another word. It wasn't until the next morning, when she came in early to mop the floor, that she noticed it. On the counter, under the tip jar, was a folded $100 bill and a business card. White, unembellished. It read only 2 words, Wolfe Industries. Elara stared at the card like it might catch fire. "Please," she whispered aloud. Bryn walked in from the back with her usual oversized headphones draped around her neck. "What's that?" "This was left here." Elara held up the card and the crisp $100 bill. "Under the tip jar." Bryn leaned in, eyes widening. "Wait, that guy from yesterday?" Elara nodded slowly. Bryn grabbed her phone and started tapping. "Girl, Wolfe Industries is like top tier. Like think tech empire, investment tycoon, mysterious rich guy with 0 public interviews. Damon Wolfe is a total recluse. They say he doesn't even show up for half his own board meetings. Elara blinked. That was Damon Wolfe? He looked at her. Yep, Bryn confirmed, flipping her phone around. A black and white photo of him filled the screen. Cold gray eyes, sharp jaw, tailored coat. It was definitely him. That's him. Why the heck is he drinking plain coffee at our cafe and leaving you $100 tips? Elara's heart thudded. I dented his car, she murmured, voice flat. Bryn snorted. And now, he's tipping you like it was a favor. Either he's got a thing for bike crashes, or… She trailed off as the door swung open again. Rain trickled from the awning. Damon Wolfe stepped inside for the second morning in a row. He didn't look at either of them, just walked straight to the counter, paused and said black. Again. Elara poured it, but her hands weren't steady. When she slid the cup toward him, he didn't reach for it right away. She said, your brakes weren't working yesterday. She blinked. No, they weren't. He looked down at the coffee. That's dangerous. A beat of silence passed, then he added, almost offhandedly, have them fixed. Here, she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. I mean, I will, she quickly added, just not right now. He took a slow sip and said nothing more. Later that afternoon, when she went outside for a short break, the bike was gone. Panicked, she darted around the side of the building, certain it had been stolen. But instead, she found it resting neatly against the wall, fully repaired. New tires, straightened handlebars, brakes that gleamed like they had been custom installed. Tied to the seat with a simple string was a white note card. No more excuses. What, Arya? Elara's breath caught. That night, she rode the bike home carefully, her hands trembling the whole way. Why was he doing this? It wasn't until the third morning, when she walked into Brew and Bloom at dawn, that she understood it wasn't just about the coffee anymore. He was already there, sitting in the same booth. No coffee in hand, no laptop open, just waiting. Elara approached cautiously. We don't open for another 10 minutes. He didn't blink. I know. She hesitated. You want to tell me what this is? Damon looked at her for a long moment. I don't know yet. The bell above the door rang as Bryn entered behind her, saving her from pressing further. By the time Elara turned back around, Damon was standing. He placed a thick envelope on the table, nodding once toward her. Then he left. Elara picked it up with careful fingers. Inside was a folded letter and another card, this one bearing her name. Elara Monroe. She hadn't given him her last name. Her stomach twisted. On the back of the note was a handwritten message. Come to Wolfe Industries tomorrow at 9 a.m. You'll want to see why. The bell over the cafe door jingled softly, its sound nearly lost in the murmur of rain against glass. Elara didn't look up. It was her fourth shift in a row, and her wrists ached from pouring lattes and scrubbing counters. She wiped a stray curl from her cheek and focused on aligning the cups on the shelf, until she felt the weight of a gaze. Damon Wolfe stood near the entrance again. His presence had become a silent rhythm. Every morning since their first crash, since her handlebars dented his expensive black car, he had appeared at precisely 8:07. A man like him should have yelled, should have called a lawyer, but he didn't. He just stared at her, as if trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to find in a coffee shop. Your usual? She asked, keeping her tone neutral. He gave the smallest nod. Black, no sugar. She handed it over without meeting his eyes, but as he stepped aside to drink in the corner, her gaze flicked toward him. The tailored coat, the stillness, the way he didn't scroll his phone like the others. Always watching, always silent. During slower moments, Elara retreated to her sketchbook. It was her private ritual, the only remnant of the artist she used to be. Beneath the counter, she'd pull the battered leather journal out and sketch faces from memories. Strangers, childhood memories, fragments of a dream. That morning, Damon saw her doing it. That's good, he said quietly. She froze, her pencil mid-curve. What? He nodded at the sketch. A little boy holding a paper airplane, his eyes full of mischief and sorrow. "You draw a lot of children." "I like drawing innocence," she replied quickly, closing the book. "The world takes it too easily." His jaw tightened. "What's his name?" She hesitated. "He's just a memory." The silence between them shifted. It wasn't awkward, but heavy, filled with the weight of unsaid truths. Damon reached for his cup again, but his hand lingered on the table's edge. "Had a nephew," he said quietly. "He used to make those airplanes, crashed them everywhere, once inside my boardroom." Elara looked up sharply, startled by the glimpse of vulnerability in his voice. "Behind." His expression shuddered. "They're gone. My brother and his son. It was years ago." Elara didn't ask more. She only nodded and turned away, but her hands shook slightly as she rinsed a mug. Damon's story scraped too close to hers. Later, she sat in the back during her break. Rain drummed against the window as she opened her sketchbook again. This time, she didn't draw the boy. She drew Damon, or at least the shadow of him, his eyes heavy with past weight. The sketch captured something vulnerable beneath the sharp angles of his jaw. And she didn't notice when her photo slipped out from the back of the book. It fluttered to the ground near the bar counter, where Damon stood waiting for a refill. He bent down to pick it up and froze. The photo was old and faded, a bit water-damaged at the corner, but the face was unmistakable. The woman standing beside Elara in the photo wore the same kind of smile he remembered. The same eyes. He stared at it, breath caught in his throat. Elara returned, her brows drawn. "Did you?" "Who is this?" Damon asked, his voice low, trembling at the edges. Elara took the photo from his hand and swallowed. That was my sister." Damon's world narrowed to a single point of disbelief. He had seen that woman before. Not in dreams, but in smoke and fire. The night someone dragged him from a burning corridor and vanished into the night. Damon's voice was quieter now, barely audible beneath the hum of the espresso machine. "Your sister, what was her name?" Elara hesitated, fingers tightening around the photograph. "Saren?" He stepped back, the name hitting him like a ghost's breath. Saren. The same name the paramedics had shouted when he came to help on the curb, coughing up smoke. The name scribbled in barely legible handwriting on the incident report, one he had chased for weeks before it vanished into silence. He had tried to find her, hired private investigators, dug through hospital records, but she'd disappeared like mist. "I tried to find her," Damon said slowly. "After the fire. She saved my life and then vanished." The Earl's expression softened, with something between pain and reverence. "That sounds like her, always running toward danger and away from praise." "What happened to her?" The words trembled on the tip of Elara's tongue. She stared down at her hands, ink-stained and trembling slightly. "She died. 2 years ago." Damon blinked. "How?" "An accident." Her voice wavered, caught between memory and emotion. "She was crossing the street. A drunk driver ran a red light. She didn't make it to the hospital." The cafe felt suddenly colder. Damon looked at the photo again, not as a businessman or a man used to control. "I'm sorry," he said. Elara nodded but said nothing. She didn't need his sympathy. She needed answers she'd long buried under shifts and silence. "She used to talk about you," Elara admitted. "Not by name, just the man in the fire. Said she wished she'd had the courage to talk to you afterward." "I wish she had," Damon murmured. "I owe her more than I can ever say." The air between them shifted again, not with tension this time, but recognition, like two lines from the same sketchbook suddenly overlapping. Elara stepped back behind the counter, putting away the photo as though protecting something sacred. "I still don't understand why you keep coming here." Damon didn't flinch. "I didn't either, at first, but now—" His gaze rested on her. "You remind me of something I lost." "I'm not her," Elara said quietly, not harshly, just truthfully. "I'm not brave like she was." "You're braver than you think," Damon replied. "She ran into fire once. But you, You stand in the ashes every day and keep going." Elara looked away, caught off guard by the way his words sank into places she didn't let people reach. The bell jingled again. Another customer. She returned to work, pretending the moment hadn't cracked something open between them. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Elara sat with her sketchbook again. She flipped pages of forgotten drawings and found the one she hadn't finished. Damon's face, half showed. She stared at it and whispered, "Why now?" She didn't believe in fate. Not since the day Saren died. Not since the bills piled up and art became a luxury she could no longer afford. But something about Damon Wolfe unsettled her. Not his money, not his name, but the way he looked at her, like she was more than just a girl behind a counter. Like he'd seen her long before they ever met. At that same moment, in a towering penthouse, Damon sat alone with a drink untouched in his hand. He pulled the photo from his coat pocket again, tracing Saren's face with his eyes. And then, carefully, he reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out an old envelope, faded, unopened. It was addressed to the man in the fire. He had found it, slipped into his coat pocket after the accident, but he'd never dared open it. Until now. Rain painted streaks on the cafe window as Elara wiped down tables, trying not to glance at the corner booth. Damon Wolfe had been coming in every morning since their collision. He never ordered more than a black coffee, never said more than a few words. But his presence filled the room like gravity. Today was different. After she brought him his coffee, Damon slid a small black folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked. He didn't smile, didn't soften. "A commission?" She raised an eyebrow. "Company is hosting a gala. We're unveiling a community arts fund. I want your work there. Something big. Personal." Elara blinked, stunned. "You've seen what I draw on napkins and coffee sleeves." "I've seen what you hide in the margins," he replied, tapping her sketch pad. She hesitated. Her first instinct was to reject the offer. Too much attention, too many strings. But the rent was due, and her younger brother needed school supplies. Still, she held his gaze. "I don't need pity." "This isn't pity," Damon said quietly. "It's recognition." Her fingers lingered on the folder. "Okay," she whispered, "but it doesn't mean we're friends." His lips twitched. "Noted." Over the next few days, they met often. At the cafe, at a nearby studio space he arranged for her, even at an art supply store Damon had rented out privately after hours. She saw flashes of the man beneath the suit. Quiet grief, quiet strength. Still, Elara kept her distance. Every time he asked about her family, about the boy in her sketches, she changed the subject. Once, in the silence of the studio, Damon noticed a canvas she'd flipped backward. "What's on that one?" he asked gently. Elara shook her head. "It's not finished." He didn't press her, but she felt his curiosity. That night, she painted past midnight, blending shadow and warmth into strokes that came from a place too deep to name. The next morning, their quiet rhythm was broken. As she stepped off the bus, her phone buzzed. Mia, her best friend and part-time roommate, had sent a message. "You're in the news." Elara's stomach dropped. She opened the link. There it was, splashed across a gossip site. "How many times will you squeeze me like this for real?" Rufus knew such a soothing, affectionate touch when he was out of. The photo was taken outside the studio. Damon's hand rested on the small of her back as they laughed about something she couldn't even remember now. Heart pounded. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere was charged. A few customers looked her way too often. One even whispered. When Damon walked in, calm as ever, Elara didn't wait. She marched over. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, holding up her phone. He looked at it, expression unreadable. "I didn't arrange that, if that's what you're asking." "Of course not. But now people are staring, assuming." She cut herself off. "I can't do this. Not like this." "Elara," he said, but she was already backing away, shaking her head. Later that night, she packed away her sketches, zipped up her paints, and left the studio key on the counter. Damon had opened a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Not when the shadows of her past clung so tightly. What would he say if he knew the truth? About the boy? About why she really didn't paint portraits anymore? She wouldn't let him find out. Not yet. Not ever. Damon stood alone in the studio after Elara left, her absence echoing louder than any silence he'd ever known. Her canvases were still here, half-finished and raw, but the spark she carried had vanished. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the empty stool where she used to sit. He didn't chase her, not yet. Instead, he opened the canvas she'd left turned to the wall. And froze. It was a painting of a little boy, the same one she'd sketched at the cafe. Curly hair, gentle eyes, but this time, Damon recognized him. It wasn't a fantasy figure. It was Lucas, his nephew. The boy who died alongside Damon's brother in the fire that shattered his world. But this portrait, this child, was older. Damon stumbled back, breath caught in his throat. How could she have drawn this? How could she know what Lucas would have looked like had he lived? Unless it wasn't a memory, unless it was real. By that night, he pulled every string he could. His security team traced the photographer. The tabloid had been tipped off, but not by him. And then he found it. A name tied to the tip-off. It wasn't a journalist. It was someone else entirely. Elara's ex-landlord. Why would he want the world to know about Elara and Damon? The next morning, Damon returned to the cafe, but Elara wasn't there. He waited in his car until Mia walked out on break. "Mia," he called gently. She flinched at first, then approached cautiously. "She's not talking to anyone." "To see if she's okay." Mia studied him. "You care about her?" He nodded once, more than I expected. Mia hesitated, then handed him a folded envelope. "She told me not to give this to anyone, but maybe she didn't mean you." He took it with trembling fingers. Inside was a sketch of Elara, as a little girl holding the hand of a boy. On the back, in faded pencil, "Even if the world forgets, I remember. I always will." No name, no date. But the boy looked like Lucas. The same dimple, the same eyes. Damon's pulse thundered. He drove to the address Mia whispered, an art co-op where Elara sometimes stayed. He found her on the rooftop, curled under a canvas dropcloth, rain beginning to mist her cheeks. "Elara," he said softly. She didn't look up. He saw the painting, he continued. "The boy, the one in your sketches. That's not just your imagination, is it?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean for you to see it." "Tell me," he said, stepping closer. She finally lifted her eyes. "My sister was Lucas's nanny. She saved him once before that fire. The second time, she wasn't there." Damon's chest ached. "You knew my brother?" "But I knew Lucas. I used to play with him when I visited my sister after school. After the fire, she disappeared. So did everything tied to your family." Damon's mind spun. "Draw him because I never got to say goodbye," she whispered. "It was the only way I could keep him with me." He crouched beside her, the chill between them breaking. "I lost them both, and I thought there was nothing left of him in the world. But then, I met you." She looked away. "I didn't want this to be complicated." "Already is," he said with a small smile. "But it's also something rare." She breathed in slowly, then nodded. They sat there as the rain faded and the sky turned gold. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, the distance between them didn't feel impossible. It felt like the start of something worth risking. Rain tapped against the glass of Elara's tiny apartment window as she sat staring at the news headline blaring from her cracked phone screen. "Maury woman seen with damaged glass. Forgot he couldn't forget them." Her heart thudded hard in her chest. The coffee shop had been quiet all morning, but now her life felt anything but. She stood abruptly, knocking over a can of paintbrushes. The photo had leaked. Somehow, someone knew more than she wanted to share. And if they kept digging, they'd find her past, they'd find Lila, they'd find everything she'd buried. The next morning, She stepped into the cafe early, apron in hand and nerves frayed. But Damon wasn't there. Not in his usual seat, not in the corner where he pretended to answer emails while watching her sketch. For a moment, she felt relief. Until a black car pulled up at the curb. She turned away, pretending not to notice, but the driver, one of Damon's staff, approached with a small envelope. "Miss Elara, Mr. Wolfe has invited you to complete the painting commission from his penthouse. You'll be paid double the original agreement." She blinked at him. "Why?" "He believes your talents deserve a better canvas." And just like that, her hesitation shattered under the weight of rent, fear, and unanswered questions. Hours later, she stepped into a glass tower lined with black marble and chrome, escorted by silence and luxury. The penthouse was modern, sleek, yet cold. It didn't feel lived in, not until she saw a small, framed photo on the fireplace mantel. She moved closer, breath catching. The photo was of Damon's family, taken years ago. His brother stood beside him, arm around a young boy with a mischievous smile and curly hair. Her stomach dropped. The boy. It was the same boy she'd known as Caleb, her late friend's son, the one she used to babysit after school, the one she drew in every sketch. She stepped back, almost stumbling. Damon entered behind her. "You okay?" She nodded too quickly. "That's your nephew." He followed her gaze. "Lucas. He and my brother died in a fire 5 years ago. I haven't been the same since." Her voice trembled. "I knew him. Not as Lucas. He was called Caleb when I knew him." Damon stiffened. "What?" Elara swallowed hard. "My best friend was his nanny. After school, I'd help her. We never knew his last name. She was told not to ask. But that's him. I'd recognize that smile anywhere." Silence stretched between them. Damon finally exhaled, stepping closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know until just now." He studied her eyes, searching for truth, and found it. She returned to her easel, trying to ground herself in the brush strokes, but her hands were shaking. As she dipped her brush in blue paint, Damon wandered to a nearby bookshelf. It was filled with mementos from his brother's life. A medal from military school, a baseball signed to my big bro Love. Then he saw it. An envelope wedged behind a faded novel. It was yellowed with time, brittle at the corners. His brother's name written across the front. Damon's fingers trembled as he pulled it free. Inside, one page. A lab result. He read the words aloud, barely above a whisper. Paternity confirmed, 99.9% subject Lucas Wolfe. His blood ran cold. The date was 6 years ago, before the fire, before everything. Elara slowly approached Damon, her voice quiet. "That boy meant everything to me. I still dream about him." Damon didn't respond immediately. He just stared down at the paper, eyes filled with grief and something sharper. Resolve. Whatever secrets lay ahead, he wasn't going to stop until he found the truth. The envelope trembled in Damon's grip as he walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection merging with the skyline beyond. The city below pulsed with life, unaware that a decades-old truth had just cracked through the polished surface of his world. He turned toward Elara. "This test, my brother knew. He knew Lucas was his son and never told me." Elara looked down, her voice barely audible. "Maybe he planned to, but someone didn't want it to come out." Damon clenched the envelope. "My father." She looked up, startled. "Where he disapproved of my brother's choices, especially his relationship with a woman who wasn't from wealth. He always said, Lucas was adopted to save face. But if this is real, they were both hidden, lied about." Elara nodded slowly. It wouldn't be the first time someone erased a person to protect a reputation. Damon's jaw tightened. He always controlled the narrative. Maybe the fire wasn't an accident after all. Elara's breath hitched. "You don't think?" "Don't know what to think, but if Lucas was my brother's son and Celeste, your friend, was involved, then someone wanted to erase more than just names." A beat of silence passed. Elara gently stepped forward. There's something else I haven't told you. He turned toward her, brows raised. Boy, Caleb, Lucas. He used to hymn a song while he colored. I didn't know it then, but months after the fire, I heard it on a video of a Wolfe family Christmas. It was your mother's voice, singing the lullaby. Damon sat down heavily on the leather couch, rubbing his temples. You're telling me you knew my family before I ever met you, and neither of us realized. She nodded, hesitant. I didn't connect the dots until now. I never knew your last name when you first came into the cafe. You were just the man I bumped into with my broken bike and messy apron. That drew a faint smile from him, even amid the storm inside. And now, wondering how deep this rabbit hole goes, Damon stood and walked toward a cabinet. From a locked drawer he pulled out another folder, this one labeled Internal Review, Wolfe Estate File. I never bought the story they gave me, that it was faulty wiring, but after today, I'm done accepting silence. He opened the folder and handed her a photo. It showed a woman, mid-30s, in a crisp housekeeper's uniform. That's Marion, our longest-serving housemaid. She disappeared a week before the fire. Elara's eyes widened. Celeste mentioned a woman named Marianne once, said she warned her to be careful, that some secrets weren't meant to survive. Damon's voice turned cold. Then Marianne might have known the truth about Lucas, about Celeste? They exchanged a look, equal parts fear and determination. Elara finally whispered, Then we need to find her. He nodded, and I need to confront my father again. No more corporate smiles or media rehearsals. I want answers. Their shared mission felt heavier now, not just rooted in justice, but in something deeply personal. That night, Elara stayed longer in the penthouse than she meant to. Damon made her tea, silent but present. She painted under the soft glow of warm lights, capturing the outline of Lucas from memory, his little face peeking through sunflowers. At one point, Damon stood behind her, watching. You draw him as if he's still alive. Elara didn't turn. Because he is. In the spaces between brushstrokes. In the lullabies. In the memories no one can erase. He stared at her a long time, and gently whispered, Thank you for not forgetting him. The next morning, Elara opened her apartment mailbox to find an unmarked envelope inside. Inside it, a faded address. Scrawled across the top, Marianne lived. The next morning, Damon arrived at Elara's small apartment unannounced. Rain trickled down his coat as he stood in the doorway, holding the address she had left on his penthouse table the night before. She froze when she saw him, a paintbrush still in her hand, the faint scent of coffee and turpentine filling the air. He didn't waste time. Tell me everything, Elara. She set the brush down slowly. Her fingers trembled as she wiped them on her apron. Liz going to, she said quietly. I just didn't know how. His voice softened, but his jaw remained tight. The boy in the sketches, the one in your stories, that's Caleb, isn't it? She nodded. His real name is Lucas, but I've called him Caleb since the night the fire took Celeste. Elara, Damon said, stepping inside. Who is he to you? She swallowed hard. Celeste was my best friend, like a sister. When the fire happened, no one came for the boy. No one claimed him, no one cared. I couldn't let him go into the system, so I took him, quietly. Damon sank into a nearby chair, the reality hitting him like a crashing tide. You've been raising my nephew, alone. Elara's voice wavered. I never lied, I just protected him. From your world, from men like your father. At the mention of his father, Damon's head snapped up. You think he knew? Don't think, she said, crossing her arms. I know. Celeste told me she was afraid, that someone warned her to disappear. The silence that fell between them was sharp, charred. Didn't you come to me? He asked finally. Because I didn't know who you were, and when I did, I was scared. You're powerful, Damon. You move in circles where money fixes everything, including people. He looked down at his hands. I was never given a chance. Neither was she, Elara replied softly. or Lucas. That afternoon, while Damon remained at the apartment trying to piece together the years lost, his father stormed into Wolfe Tower's upper boardroom. He'd received an anonymous tip, one that included a photo of Elara, Damon, and the boy. The resemblance to Damon's late brother was undeniable. "This is a problem," Reginald Wolfe said, slamming the photo onto the glass table. "That woman has inserted herself into our legacy, and if the press catches wind of this, the scandal will gut shareholder trust." Damon, calm but cold, replied, "You're more worried about stock prices than a child's life?" "I'm worried about this company surviving another quarter," Reginald snapped. "If you want to protect that boy, take it. Make it seem like we've always known. Spin the story. Use the tragedy." "Agreed," Damon said, rising. "You don't get to dictate how this plays out." "Then I'll handle it myself," his father threatened. "The courts are loyal to this name. All it takes is one petition, and that child will be ours." Damon froze. "You wouldn't." His father smirked. "Watch me." Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Elara was packing. She'd seen enough courtroom nightmares to know how these stories ended. The rich one, the quiet, powerless ones disappeared. She couldn't risk Lucas becoming a pawn. Caleb sat on the floor, humming softly as he colored a picture of a lighthouse. Elara's eyes welled with tears. She zipped the duffel bag and knelt beside him. "Sweetheart, we're going on a little trip, okay?" "Where?" he asked, eyes wide. "Somewhere safe." But before she could stand, the door opened. Damon stepped in, alone, breathless, and with a storm behind his eyes. "Putelgrau," he said, voice shaking. "Please." Elara stood frozen, clutching the bag. "Him. Can't stay," she whispered. "You know what your father will do. He'll have to get through me first." Elara stared at Damon, eyes glistening with both fear and something deeper. "Hope has influence," she whispered. "Connections. If he petitions for guardianship, he could win. I'm not his blood." "You're the only parent Caleb has ever known," Damon replied, "and I won't let him be ripped away from you, from us." Caleb looked up from his drawing, sensing the tension. He stood and walked slowly toward Damon, his small hands clutching the picture he'd made. The boy tilted his head curiously, then reached out and tugged gently at Damon's sleeve. "Uncle D." The room went silent. Damon's breath caught. His walls, the ones he'd built so carefully for years, cracked with one word. "Say that again," he whispered. "Uncle D," Caleb said, smiling. "That's what Mama used to call you, in the picture." Elara's knees buckled, and she dropped to the couch, burying her face in her hands. Damon knelt down, slowly, level with the boy. "You know who I am?" Caleb nodded. "You look like the man in the photo on Mommy's necklace, and you talk like her." She said, "You were brave?" Damon swallowed hard. He took the drawing Caleb had made, a lighthouse with 3 people standing at the top. The little boy in the middle had dark curls and was holding hands with a tall man and a woman with a ponytail. Above it, scrawled in crayon, were the words, "My family." "Elara," Damon said, standing. "You're not running anymore. If you leave, he loses everything. And so do I." She met his eyes. "And if your father wins?" "Then I lose him. But I'd rather lose him trying to protect him than live pretending we didn't love him first." That night, Damon made calls. Powerful ones, not to suppress the scandal, but to reveal the truth on his terms. By dawn, media outlets were buzzing, but the headlines were different than Reginald Wolfe had expected. Review: acknowledges secret, nephew, fights to keep him with guardian who raised him. From boardroom to backyard, billionaire's hidden family revealed. Instead of chaos, there was sympathy, warmth, and more importantly, pressure. Reginald fumed as donors, investors, and journalists demanded answers. The next day, at Wolfe Tower, Damon entered the executive boardroom with Elara and Caleb by his side. His father sat at the head of the table, flanked by attorneys. "Is it a negotiating?" Damon began. "It's a warning. File a petition for custody, and I walk, so do our partners." You'd sacrifice your birthright for a woman and a child? Damon said, his tone like steel. I'd be reclaiming my humanity. The silence that followed was absolute. Reginald stood but said nothing. For once, he had no leverage. As they turned to leave, Caleb tugged at Damon's hand. Is he like the big wolf in the stories? Elara laughed softly, surprised. Damon looked down and smiled. Something like that. That evening, Elara sat in the cafe again, the rain tapping gently on the windows. Damon walked in, not in a tailored suit, but in jeans and a hoodie. He ordered nothing, just sat across from her, studying her with quiet gratitude. Never imagined this, he said. Not just finding Caleb, but you. I didn't want any of this, she replied, but I wanted him to be safe, to be loved. You've done both, he said. Better than any of us ever could. Elara looked away, her voice cracking. What happens now? Damon reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Now, we fight together. And as if on cue, Caleb burst through the door, holding a paper crown from school, shouting, Uncle, look! Damon caught him mid-leap, laughter rising from somewhere deep and real. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Elara stepped inside, her hand clutching the strap of her worn leather bag. The judge's bench towered before her, but her eyes immediately found Damon across the room. He sat with a quiet storm in his gaze, hands clasped tightly, jaw rigid. But when he saw her, his shoulders softened, just enough for her to breathe again. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed, speculating wildly after the leaked tabloid photo. Reclusive CEO fights for secret nephew, one headline had screamed. But inside these walls, it wasn't about headlines or reputation. It was about a boy who had lost too much and was about to lose more. Damon stood first. His attorney presented the petition for joint guardianship, laying out the facts. DNA results, the mother's death certificate, and a notarized letter from her naming Elara as guardian until the boy's paternal family could be located. The judge asked if Damon wanted this. Damon said, voice firm, he already has a mother. I just want to make sure he never feels abandoned again. Elara's chest tightened. She stepped up to the stand next. Her fingers trembled slightly as she swore in. The courtroom was silent. Every face turned to her, expecting judgment, perhaps scandal. I met Mina when we were 17, she began. She was my best friend. She had a son, Leo. His father never knew. She was afraid. Not of him, she said. He was kind, but of the world that would twist her story. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She passed away. I didn't think twice. I raised Leo like he was mine. I worked 2 jobs. I slept on floors. But I promised him I'd never let anyone take him from the people who loved him. She turned to Damon, her voice cracking. I met Damon. I didn't know who he was, and when I found out, I was scared. Not of him, of what the truth might cost. The judge leaned forward. Do you believe Mr. Wolfe is capable of raising this child with you? Elara nodded. Yes, not because of his name, but because Leo looks at him like he's finally found home. Silence stretched across the room like a held breath. Then the gavel hit. Joint guardianship is granted to both Mr. Damon Wolfe and Ms. Elara Hart, effective immediately. Elara blinked, barely processing the words before Damon crossed the room to her. He didn't speak, just took her hand in his and held it tightly. There was no triumph in his expression, only gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. Outside, the reporters surged, flashes popping, but Elara and Damon shielded Leo between them like a fortress. He reached up and grabbed each of their hands, a small grin lighting his face. Damon leaned toward her as they guided Leo into the car. You never owed me the truth, he whispered, but you gave me something I never thought I'd have again, family. Before she could respond, Damon's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. He frowned, opened it, and froze. It was a grainy photo, an alley, a handshake. His father's face, unmistakable, passing a thick envelope to a man in a gray hoodie. Damon stared at the photo for a long moment, his his jaw tightening. The timestamp on the image was from the night before, just hours before the court hearing. He didn't need a caption to understand. His father was still trying to manipulate the outcome, still playing power games with people's lives. "Elara," he said quietly, "we need to talk." They were back in her small apartment by evening, Leo curled up on the couch, sketching superheroes in crayon while the rain tapped against the windows. Damon paced slowly across the room before turning to her. "Father bribed someone," he said. "I think he tried to sway the custody ruling, maybe even dig into your background." Elara's eyes widened, not with fear, but with exhaustion. "I knew he wouldn't let this go quietly," she murmured. "He never does he?" Damon replied, his voice like steel. "But he doesn't get to control this anymore." She sat down, rubbing her arms. "What are you going to do?" "Everything I should have done years ago," he said. "Cut ties, take control of the board, protect Leo." "And you?" Elara blinked, startled by the intensity of his promise. She had grown used to carrying burdens alone. Hearing someone claim them as their own, it broke something inside her, something that had been hardened for years. Later that night, Leo climbed onto her lap, resting his head on her shoulder. "Are we still a family?" he asked. Elara looked at Damon, who knelt beside them. "We're better than a family," Damon said gently. "We're forever." Leo smiled, the kind of smile that only comes when a child feels truly safe. The next morning, Damon called an emergency board meeting at Wolfe Enterprises. His father arrived late, smug as always, flanked by loyal executives. But the moment Damon displayed the photo, his father's hand delivering cash in a back alley, the room fell silent. "He bribed someone to interfere in a child's custody," Damon said coldly. "Effective immediately, I'm removing you from your seat. The board will vote, but I'm invoking Clause 12. "You wouldn't dare," his father growled. "Oriented," Damon replied. "You taught me everything I know about strategy, but you forgot to teach me mercy." The board sided with Damon. By the time he left the building, the sun had broken through the gray clouds, casting a golden sheen across the street. He didn't go home to the penthouse. He went to the small cafe on the corner of Elara's street. The place where this all began, with a crash and a coffee. He walked inside, looked around, and smiled when he saw the framed sketch Elara had once doodled on a napkin. It now hung above the register, an image of 3 hands held together in crayon and charcoal. Later that evening, Elara returned home to find him standing outside her door, holding Leo's favorite comic book. "I know you're tired," he said, "and I know you're still scared, but I need you to know something." She opened the door, letting him in. He looked around the cozy apartment, where every surface held a trace of her life's sketches: paintbrushes, children's books, and coffee mugs with chipped edges. "You didn't just give Leo a home," Damon said. "You gave him a soul, a sense of wonder, and you gave me something I thought I'd never deserve again: hope." Her breath hitched. Before either of them could speak further, Leo bounded out of the room, waving a plastic toy sword. "Uncle D, we need a knight in the kingdom." Damon laughed, the sound warm and real, and reached out to scoop the boy into his arms. "He is gone again," she said, frowning. He frowned again, and this time he realized this was a family. And in the shadows, miles away, Damon's father made another call. But this time, someone was already listening. The grand ballroom of Wolfe Industries shimmered under crystal chandeliers, each light casting a golden hue across the sea of gowns and tuxedos. Elara stood behind the heavy velvet curtain, her heart pounding beneath the sleek black dress borrowed for the evening. Damon had insisted she debut her commissioned painting at the gala, his gala, but it was more than that now. It was a story, their story, told in brush strokes and color. When the curtains parted and the spotlight warmed her skin, Elara stepped forward to polite applause. But as the painting was revealed, silence swept over the crowd. There it stood, 6 feet tall, an oil-on-canvas masterpiece titled "Legacy in the Ashes." On it, Damon's younger self held his brother's hand. Behind them, a small boy reached for them both, and in the background, the faint outline of Elara's silhouette, watching over them like a guardian. Gasps rippled. A woman dabbed at her eyes. Elara heard Damon inhale beside her. He hadn't seen the final version until this very moment. Damon stepped to the microphone. This painting is more than art. It's a reminder of the people we lose and the family we find. His voice cracked on the last word. But before the applause could return, a voice rang out from the back. Touching, truly, came the cutting tone of Damon's father, Richard Wolfe, stepping forward with two journalists flanking him. Cameras clicked. But how touching is it when your trusted CEO invites a barista into your legacy and fails to mention she was hiding your heir all along? Whispers surged through the crowd like a wildfire. Elara froze, her breath caught in her throat. Damon's jaw tightened. This woman, Richard continued, kept the boy from his rightful place in this family, and now she reaps the spotlight? Or was this your idea of a cover-up, Damon? Damon said firmly, his voice rising above the whispers. She didn't hide him, she protected him. He walked across the stage and took Elara's hand, in full view of the crowd. She raised him when no one else would. She never asked for thanks. She asked for love and truth. Richard sneered. You're blinded, son. She's manipulating you. Damon shook his head. I see clearly for the first time, and I won't let you twist this. More flashes, more questions. A reporter called out, Is it true you're sharing custody? Damon replied, Joint guardianship, court approved. Another voice chimed in, Is she part of the Wolfe family now? Elara opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, of cameras, of Damon's father's disdain, of the boy waiting at home who believed in them both. Damon looked at her and nodded softly. Five, she finally said, maybe not by name yet, but by choice. And love? The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but applause. Richard's face paled, rage flickering behind his eyes. He turned and stormed out of the ballroom, the reporters trailing after him like scavengers sensing a bigger story. Backstage, Damon and Elara collapsed into each other's arms, the noise fading behind them. Elara whispered, What happens now? Damon cupped her face. Now we stop hiding. She searched his eyes for doubt, but found only resolve. I was never trying to take anything, I just didn't know how to give it without losing him. You gave him something I couldn't, Damon murmured. You gave him safety and love, and that gave me more. And for the first time, she didn't look away. The air outside the ballroom was cooler, quieter. Damon guided Elara toward a side hallway where they could breathe, just the two of them. The light scent of champagne and roses lingered in the air, but it was the hum of tension in Damon's shoulders she noticed most. I didn't mean for tonight to become a spectacle, Elara said softly, still shaken. He turned to face her. You didn't. My father did. He's always used shame as a weapon. But tonight, you didn't break. Elara leaned against the wall, eyes heavy. I didn't feel brave, like I'd painted my heart and handed it over to strangers. You did, Damon replied, and it made them feel something real. She swallowed hard. Do you think they'll believe your father, the press? I don't care, he said, taking her hand. Let them talk, let them twist. But I know the truth, and so does the boy. Just then, Damon's phone buzzed, a message from the nanny. He's asleep, but he asked if Miss Elara would tuck him in tomorrow morning. Tears welled in her eyes. He still wants me. He always will, Damon said. We both will. The door to the alley creaked open. One of the event staff stepped out, breathless. Sir, just letting you know, your father left before the closing speech, but something strange. One of the guests said they saw him exchanging an envelope with someone outside. Looked like cash. Damon's eyes narrowed. Did you see who? The staffer hesitated. No, but they had a press badge. Elara's stomach dropped. He's not finished. Damon's expression hardened. Then neither are we. They stepped back into the venue together, but this time, hand in hand, not just as allies, but something more unspoken. Later that night, back at Damon's penthouse, Elara stood on the balcony, overlooking the city skyline. The boy's art was taped gently on the refrigerator behind her, crayon sketches of a tall man, a smiling woman, and a house with stars above it. "Damon?" she asked as he joined her outside. She turned toward him. "Tonight, when you said, 'If I can't have peace, I want you,' was that just for the cameras?" He stepped closer. "No, that was for you." She blinked back tears. "Because I'm not Celeste. I'm not someone from your past." "You know exactly who you are," he said. "You are the woman who made my nephew laugh again, who brought color back into my world. You are not a shadow. I see you." Elara took a shaky breath. "And what if your father tries to use me to hurt your image? Or the boy?" "Then we fight," Damon said, "together." She let out a slow exhale. "It feels like a war." He admitted. "But this time, we're not losing." Inside, the wind stirred the edge of one of her paintings, an unfinished canvas resting near the window. Elara glanced at it. The brushstrokes were chaotic, rushed. But now, she saw what it needed. Soft edges. A sunrise. "Do you want peace?" she asked. "Name," Damon said, stepping behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I want a life. With you, with him. No more hiding, no more half-truths." She looked up at him. "Then you'll have it." Below them, the city pulsed with life. Headlines would swirl, voices would speculate. But in that moment, beneath a sky just beginning to shift from ink to dawn, the truth stood still, between them. Not just a promise. A beginning. The studio smelled of morning light, coffee, and old paper. Elara's favorite blend of comfort. It was early, just after sunrise, and the world outside was still gray with mist. Damon stood in the center of the studio with a canvas set carefully on an easel. There were no flowers, no velvet boxes, no crowds, just this space where her heart had been rediscovered and where his had quietly started beating again. Elara stepped inside, her eyes flicking between the canvas and the man who had once stormed out of a black car and into her life. "Damon, what is this?" He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle of brand new paintbrushes tied with twine. He held them out to her with both hands. "I thought about diamonds, about big gestures, but you already gave me something rare and—" She took the brushes, her fingers brushing against his. "You're not proposing with a ring?" He shook his head. "I'm proposing with a blank canvas. Because our story wasn't written in gold or promises. It was sketched in moments. Quiet ones, broken ones, brave ones. I want to paint every day from here on, with you." A sound caught in Elara's throat, half a laugh, half a cry. She looked at the canvas, untouched, unspoiled. "You want to build something real." "The woman who saved my nephew," he said, "with the woman who reminded me I'm human." Behind them, the boy stirred. He rubbed his eyes and wandered over in his little pajama set, dragging his blanket behind him like a cape. He blinked at the canvas and grinned. "Can I paint too?" Damon crouched and ruffled his hair. "You started all this, little man. You'd better help finish it." Elara lowered to the boy's level. "Only if you promise to paint your truth." The boy looked at them both, then nodded. "Our truth is family, right?" She kissed the top of his head. "Right." Together, the three of them stood in front of that canvas, hands full of paint, hearts open, ready. Not for perfection, but for permanence. The ceremony was nothing like the lavish affairs people expected from a wolf. It took place in a small garden behind the studio, under a wooden arch draped in ivy and morning dew. A local judge stood beside them with a smile that felt like it belonged in a simpler world. Elara wore a linen dress with smudges of paint on the sleeves, and Damon, despite the designer suit, had a splash of blue on his collar from the boy's earlier contribution to their shared painting. There were no guests, just the three of them, a canvas and the wind. The boy, barefoot and beaming, stood between them, holding their hands like glue. When the judge asked if there were any vows, Damon stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I've made a lot of deals, closed 1,000 contracts. But I've never wanted to sign my name to anything as much as this." He looked at Elara. You brought color back into a world that I left in grayscale. You didn't just give my nephew a home, you gave me a place I didn't know I'd been missing. Elara's voice wavered, but her eyes were steady. I've been painting my whole life, but I never knew the meaning of art until this. Until you both. You weren't just a collision, Damon. You were the beginning of everything I didn't know I deserved. The boy held up their rings on a little wood palette he'd painted himself. On it, he'd written, "Family, Wolfe, not by blood, but by love." They exchanged rings, and as the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the boy leapt up and threw his arms around their waists. The moment was imperfect and messy, and more sacred than anything Elara had ever dreamed of. Weeks later, the studio opened its doors to the public. Elara called it the Brush and Light Studio, though the full name on the front sign read in gold letters, Wolfe Foundation presents The Brush and Light, a space for young artists. It was Damon's wedding gift, not just to her, but to every kid who ever needed a space to feel seen. Inside, the walls were filled with color, not just hers, but the work of students, of children, of survivors. Hope brushed into every frame. And in the back corner, on a wall reserved for founding works, hung one final painting. It was a triptych. The left panel held the image of a woman on a bicycle in the rain, her eyes forward, her heart uncertain. The center, Elara, Damon, and the boy, standing before the blank canvas from the morning of the proposal. And on the right, the boy, older now, painting alone with a caption underneath, handwritten in his own uneven scrawl. Family, Wolfe, not by blood, but by love. Outside the studio window, sunlight spilled across the sidewalk. Inside, they read books together, laughing as the boy pointed at funny words and asked impossible questions. Damon leaned back in the old armchair, his tie loosened, his hand resting on Elara's knee. She looked up, whispered, "They will ever stop crashing into each other." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope not." The screen faded to black. Words appeared in white, soft and slow. Sometimes it takes a crash to find what you were always meant to hold.